Gina, can you talk about that as well from your perspective? I mean, you're actually representing people who are on the short end of this kind of racial inequality. How do you deal with those attitudes?
When I think about this question, it just kind of raises the hair on my skin. Like it is so just, it's so sad that we live in a reality in which there are statements like that you mentioned, that people would say that even if you're not convicted, that you still deserve the time that you got, pre-trial or whatever it was. I mean, I have a hard time even interacting with kind of that mode of thought, because it is just so far from what we should be up to as people in this society and how we caretake for one another. And I think about, I run an organization called Essie Justice Group, which is a loving and powerful community of women with incarcerated loved ones. So mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, girlfriends, grandmothers of people behind bars. 1 in 4 women in the US, because of mass incarceration, has a family member in prison. For Black women, 1 in 2. And so this is a huge number of women who are not just directly impacted, but know up close and personal what the system looks like, what it's doing to families, what the ramifications and consequences are of our doubling down on this, kind of punishment path. And every year we, for the last 3 or 4 years, we have been bailing Black women out of jail before Mother's Day. We are founding members of the National Bailout Collective. And last year, we met a woman, a mother, inside of an LA County jail. And she was there when we met her for 14 months. She had been there for 14 months. She was denied access to medical care, had suffered a spinal cord injury that she was not getting treatment for. And the jail officials refused to take her to family court. And so as a result of having missed her court dates, her children were separated, not just from each other, but also she had lost her custody. All of that happened within the course of the 14 months and more, right? The consequences were traumatizing and devastating, not just for her, but for an entire family. We raised $200,000, another issue for another time to explain. The bail framework in this country is a mess, but we raised $200,000 to secure her freedom, to buy her freedom. When she was released, her case was dismissed. And the reality is that there are so many people who are inside of jails pre-trial who are just like her, who, but for not being able to have money to pay, are losing an incredible amount unnecessarily and suffering tremendous consequences. And so to the person who would say she somehow deserved, and her children somehow deserved what happened to her because even though she didn't get a conviction, that was something that it boggles the mind. And I think about this as also, as being incredibly important, how we frame this issue of, is it broken or is it working as it was designed, is not an academic question for me. It's a question that I encounter every day as we pursue policy reform in our work. When I serve as one of the co-chairs of the Movement for Black Lives policy table, and last summer when we were all just kind of awakened to the horrors of the violent policing in our communities with the loss and death and murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and Ahmaud Arbery, what the response was that we saw from Congress was a response that operated from a central analysis that said this system is broken, right? And so what that looked like in terms of the policies that were promoted, that we saw inside of that bill, that we see inside of that bill, were what we would consider reformist, were things that were not going to transform or make this country safe for Black people. And instead were, things like, I remember the conversations we were all having about qualified immunity and no knock warrant bans and things like that. And I thought to myself, as a mother, as a daughter and a sister and, of Black people, I am invested in policy change that looks like ensuring that myself, my family members, and my children can live free from criminal legal system violence. Not that it will be easier for us in a court of law one day after the fact to receive damages and some type of compensatory relief, right? And yet what we seem to be talking about is qualified immunity over and over again. And I'm not saying that's not important. We want bans to qualified immunity. It's very important, and that is a win. But the problem is that the scope of the solutions that we're discussing are all within kind of a framework of all we need to do is kind of nibble at the edges and just set the train back on the track. It just kind of veered off a bit. And that is a not a good use of our time and our resources. Lastly, I will just say, you asked, what do we need to do? We need movement. We need organizers. We need people pressure. It's not just going to take, good, well-intentioned work from inside out. It is going to require the connecting of communities and directly impacted people to lead this work for it to really be transformative.